With the top decks in the meta right now costing $300 to $400+, I wanted to make a few deck lists that came in at the sub $100 mark. Let's go through 3 different deck lists coming in at $30, $60, and $90. The first of our budgets is $30. This budget is pretty small, but I honestly think this list is great, coming in at only $29.50. We start off with 4 copies of Duke of Wesselton Opportunistic Official, which is our basic 1-cost inkable 2/2 card. Next up is Minnie Mouse Always Classy at 4 copies. I've really been enjoying these 1/3 line cards because of their ability to stay in play. Plus, with our next card, which is also run 4 copies of, Megara Pulling the Strings, Minnie Mouse jumps up to a 3/3 when Megara is played. We run 4 copies of Cruella de Vil Miserable as Usual, which when she is challenged and banished, we get to return the opposing character to the hand. Most of the other Punishing Emerald cards are too expensive for this budget, but Cruella is a great low-cost option. We have 4 copies of Gaston Arrogant Hunter, who is 4 strength for only 2 ink, but has Reckless, meaning he has to challenge if able. This really helps us deal with any bigger threats and is inkable if we don't need him. Next up is 4 copies of Jasper Common Crook. Jasper is becoming one of my favorite Emerald control options, letting us choose an opposing character that can't quest their next turn each time we quest with Jasper. This is just great all-around lore control. Our first evasive in this list is 4 copies of Peter Pan Never Landing, which is just a great 3-cost evasive character that quests for 1. Then we have 4 copies of Aladdin Street Rat, who causes each opponent to lose 1 lore when he is played, and is also a shift target for Aladdin Heroic Outlaw. We have 2 copies of Peter Pan Fearless Fighter, which is our own little mini Rafiki, being a 3-cost and a 3/2 line with Rush, so he can challenge the turn he is played. Another evasive is 4 copies of Tinkerbell Most Helpful, who quests for 2 and also adds that when she is played, we get to give another character evasive, which while situational can be helpful. Sticking with the same stat line is 4 copies of Pongo Ol Rascal, which is identical to Tinkerbell except giving another character evasive. We run 4 copies of Mad Hatter Gracious Host, which quests for 3 lore, and whenever he is challenged, we get to draw a card. This card is amazing in Emerald decks, and luckily since it's in the Emerald Ruby starter deck, it stays pretty cheap. Our last evasive character is 4 copies of Goofy Daredevil, who is a 5-cost 3/4 that quests for 2 lore. The final character in our list is 4 copies of Aladdin Heroic Outlaw, who boasts some of the best lore control in the game, in that every time he challenges and banishes a character, we gain 2 lore and the opponent loses 2 lore. This 4-point lore swing is just fantastic, and just like Mad Hatter, it is a good thing it is in the starter deck or this would be out of our budget. We run 4 copies of Dragonfire, which lets us banish a character and again fits in this budget because of its appearance in a starter deck. We wrap up this deck with 4 copies of Mother Knows Best, which lets us return a character to the hand. Because we don't have the budget to run other field control like Kuzco or Genie on the Job, this is a great budget option of field control. For $30, I really don't think you can beat this list. This list can absolutely hold its own against opposing decks that cost way more. Up next is our $60 budget, with Sapphire Steel Item Ramp. This deck comes in at $58.46. We start off this list with 4 copies of Captain Hook Forceful Duelist, which while he only has 1 strength, he has Challenger 2, meaning he jumps up to 3 strength on our turn, letting us deal with smaller threats on the board while still having 2 willpower. This goes for our 4 copies of Prince Eric Dashing and Brave, except he has 3 willpower. Onto our first ramp card, we have 4 copies of Grandma Tala Storyteller, who when banished we can put her into our inkwell, and this works on our turn as well, so if an opponent isn't taking her out, we can swing her into something to ramp. Another ramp card is 4 copies of Mickey Mouse Detective, which when played lets us put the top card of our deck into our inkwell. He is just fantastic ramp for only 3 cost. Kicking off our item combos, and we have 4 copies of Belle Inventive Engineer, which when she quests, we pay 1 less for the next item card we play. She quests for 2, and this ability stacks, so we will get massive payoffs when questing with her, and she is only 3 cost. Up next is 4 copies of Maleficent Uninvited, who is quickly jumping up to my second favorite 5 cost behind Maui. She has a whopping 6 willpower and quests for 3 lore, and with our ramping abilities, we should have no problem dropping multiple of her. Next up is 2 copies of Captain Hook Thinking a Happy Thought, who is shift 3, meaning we can pay just 3 to play him on our Captain Hook Forceful Duelist, and has Challenger 3, meaning he is a 5 strength on our turn. He also adds that characters with 3 cost or less cannot challenge him, meaning the opponent will have to swing something big into him. We also run 4 copies of Maurice, World Famous Inventor, who whenever he quests, we get to pay 2 less for the next item we play. Again, this stacks with Belle or other Maurices, so we can play some of our more expensive items for free. He also adds that whenever we play an item card, we get to draw a card. This is fantastic, as with our ramp package, we will probably have a lower hand size and Maurice lets us fill back up. We run 2 copies of Simba Return King, who is our tech for evasives, but also has Challenger 4, making him 8 strength on our turn. Another 2 of is Maui Demigod, who is just a big card boasting an 8/8 stat line. Our final character is our main item payoff with 4 copies of Tamatoa So Shiny. Whenever he is played or quests, we get to return an item from our discard to our hand, which is fantastic for any item we banished for its effect, or if our opponent is running any item removal, but his biggest ability is that he quests for base 1 lore and adds 1 lore for each of our items in play. When we get mid to late game, there is no reason Tamatoa shouldn't be questing for 5+ lore each turn. We run 4 copies of Smash, which is just great targeted damage, letting us deal 3 damage to a character. For songs, we run 4 copies of One Jump Ahead, which lets us put the top card from our deck into our Inkwell. There is also synergy with Grandma Tala, because if the opponent doesn't have anything for us to swing into, we can sing One Jump Ahead with Grandma Tala. Onto our items, and we start with 4 copies of Magic Golden Flower, which we can banish to remove up to 3 damage from a chosen character. This is great synergy with Tamatoa, because we can get this back whenever he is played or quests. We run 3 copies of Beast Mirror, which if our hand is empty, we can pay 3 to draw a card. Like mentioned previously, with all our ramping, our hand can get empty, and this is a great way to bump up Tamatoa's lore while giving us a card sometimes. We run 3 copies of Fishbone Quill. We can exert this card to put any card from our hand into our Inkwell face down. This is another great ramp card, but more importantly bumps up Tamatoa. Our final card is probably the best item for Tamatoa decks, and that's 4 copies of Eye of the Fates, which we can exert to have 1 character quest for 1 more lore that turn. This means a +2 to Tamatoa, and this can stack, so multiple Eye of the Fates can add onto 1 character. This is another great budget deck, and Tamatoa is one of my favorite Lorcana cards, so being able to build this deck for under $60 is excellent. Our final deck in this video is our budget Amethyst Ruby deck, coming in at $90.62. If you have played any amount of Lorcana, you know that Amethyst Ruby is the clear-cut tier 1 deck in the meta, but often costs over $400. This budget version is a great starting point for that deck, giving you many of the outstanding cards in those colors while foregoing the very expensive ones. We start off this list with 4 copies of Archimedes Highly Educated Owl. This is the basic 1-cost inkable 2/2 line card, and you can run Sergeant Tibbs here if you have that. Next up is 4 copies of Yzma Alchemist, who when played lets us look at the top card of the deck and either leave it there or put it on the bottom of our deck. Because of Amethyst's great draw power, Yzma lets us manipulate what cards we are seeing next on our turn. We run 3 copies of Magic Broom Bucket Brigade, which is our tech for control mirrors, letting us just keep recycling the brooms to prevent a deck out. We run 4 copies of Gaston Arrogant Hunter, who like mentioned in the first budget deck, is a great 4 strength for 2 costs, with the only drawback being he has to challenge if able. Next is 4 copies of Maleficent Sorceress, which when played lets us draw a card, kicking off Amethyst's amazing draw power. We have 4 copies of Rafiki Mysterious Sage, who has a 3/3 line and rush, meaning he can challenge the turn he has played. This is generally run in smaller quantities, but since we can't afford Maui's in this budget, we run 4 copies. Next up is 4 copies of Aladdin Street Rat, which again is great lore control, while also providing an early shift target for our top-end Aladdin Heroic Outlaw. We run 2 copies of the Queen Wicked and Vain. I used to be a proponent for 3 to 4 copies of the Queen, but this budget forced some cuts, and I actually really like this card in smaller quantities because it doesn't feel like a dead draw as often when I'm looking for non-draw cards. Up next is 4 copies of Stitch Abomination, which is our 3 lore quester, taking the place for Ursula Power Hungry or Mickey Mouse Brave Little Tailor, since those are such expensive cards. Rounding out our characters is 4 copies of Aladdin Heroic Outlaw, who again is some of the best lore control in the game, and is our main top-end card since we can't afford to run things like Maleficent Monstrous Dragon or Elsa Spirit of Winter. On to actions, and we start with 3 copies of Befuddle, which lets us bounce a 2-cost or less card to the hand, which is great for combating aggro decks. We run 4 copies of Dragonfire, which lets us banish a chosen character. This is just great budget removal for this deck. We also run 4 copies of Friends on the Other Side, another great Amethyst draw card letting us draw 2 cards, but also can be sung by our Maleficent Sorceress or other 3-cost or more characters for free. Because we were able to conserve budget with our other options, we were able to fit 4 copies of Be Prepared in here, which is far and away the best removal in the game right now. On the items, we start with 4 copies of Shield of Virtue, which lets us pay 3 to ready a character, but that character can't quest for this turn. This is a great combo, letting us quest or challenge and then ready that character to be safe the next turn, or lets us quest or challenge then ready them to challenge something else. We have more draw power in 2 copies of Magic Mirror, which for 4 costs lets us draw a card. Our final card is 2 copies of White Rabbit's Pocket Watch, which for 1 cost lets us choose a character to gain Rush that turn. This is fantastic to combo with Aladdin if we don't have a shift target, letting us drop him and challenge for a 4 lore swing on the turn he is played. I firmly believe this is a great budget option to the tier 1 deck and is a great starting point if you plan to fully build Amethyst Ruby in the future. Let me know what you think of each of these lists, anything you would change, or do you have different decks you would recommend for each budget? Let me know in the comments down below.